Hello and welcome to Should I Wish Someone Told Me, a weekly series of educational conversations where my guest and I talk about all of these shit that we wish someone would have told us about life so that you don't have to figure it out the hard way. I'm your host, Johnna Renée, and I am the only one that is going to be joining us for our conversation today. So let's go ahead and dive right in, shall we? So this episode is on a life redesign, as you can tell from the title. And this is the third month that we have been operating under the new way of making sure that each month is dedicated to a specific pillar. And those pillars are self-discovery, evolution of the self, this month, life redesign, and the next month, we're going to be talking about your future focus formula for success. Those are the 4 pillars of the self system, which is what I use whenever I work with clients to help them figure out who it is that they are, how they can leverage their evolution for their success via a life redesign, and how to keep on keeping on with that forward focus momentum. So the past few months have been building, and what I have been preparing you for is this month in terms of a life redesign. And so, what I want to share about a life redesign is, first of all, the fact that most of us don't take the time to redesign these big parts of our lives that are really influential in how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about life in general, our happiness and overall well-being, mentally and physically. We don't take the time to actually ever really reevaluate those things until we are forced to do so, until something happens and it's like, I've got to make a change, right? We stay in the relationship well past its expiration date simply because it's easier to do that than it is to break up, move out, talk about, splitting up the finances and all of that stuff, right? Just as an example, it's easier to stay in the job that you hate, even though you don't, it's not fulfilling, because looking for a job would be that much more challenging. You've been there. Things are pretty good. They aren't necessarily bad, but they're not necessarily great either. So it's just easier to stay. And we can talk about why that happens psychologically. There is you have a finite amount of motivation. And so what that means is that the more steps there are to create change, the more challenging it's going to be and the more resistance we're going to have. It's like, well, I don't really want to do that. And it's not because you don't want to do it. It's not because you're lazy or unmotivated. It's because we only have so much motivation before that runs out every day. And so the more resistance we can remove whenever we are taking the steps towards redesigning a life that we want on our terms, once we know what that is, once we have identified that via self-discovery, once we have looked at how we can actually leverage our experience and the evolution of who we are to create that outcome, then the easier it's going to be. And so I'm going to talk a bit more about that, because I know that when I say life redesign, right, it's like shit, like that's overwhelming, like the whole ass thing, right? And so I'm going to talk a bit more about that in just a few minutes, about how to break that down so that it is not so overwhelming. But I want to again, like, point out the fact that we don't do it until we have to, right? Like most of us don't do it until we have to, but not you, because you are here. And so the way that I like to think of that is it's the equivalent of seeing the check engine light on and just not doing anything about it. It's like, oh, well, I'll worry about that tomorrow, right? Oh, I'll call the shop, or I'll run by the mechanic, like I'll do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes and it's like, well, I'll do it the next day. And the next day comes, it's like, oh, well, I've made it 2 days already. Like I'll just, wait another, kind of a thing. And that's how I see this happening when it's this is how this usually happens. I don't want to say, exceptions to every rule, so don't come at me. But this is what usually happens when we, again, notice this relationship isn't really serving me anymore. Or when we're like, I don't really like this job. Just to use those 2 examples. We can apply it to so many things, but just to go back to those since we already referenced them. So it's the same thing. We don't do anything until the car suddenly doesn't start. And so this is the way that I want to present it to you, just so that you can kind of have hopefully a moment of realization where you're like, oh, that's true, right? And to remind you that you don't have to wait for a breakdown in order to have a breakthrough. And I want this episode to be your check engine light, and it can be if you let it. So like I mentioned, over the past few months, we've been building to this point because it's something where it's important that you know who you are via self-discovery. You know what's important to you. You know where you want to go, and you look at where you actually are and get real with yourself. And then from there, we look at the evolution to consider, okay, what can I leverage based on my experience, based on my resources to actually redesign this life that I want, which is what we're talking about this whole month. And so that was to prepare you for now, so that you can actually see the evolution, if you will, of this process, right? And also I mentioned evolution. It's something where it's important that it's linear, but also then it's very fluid. So it's something that, yes, like we build the foundation, but then just because we have advanced to calculus doesn't mean that we're never going to go back and do, you know, basic arithmetic kind of a thing. So we're always going to go back and refine and adjust and tweak. And like, we need to revisit things like from time to time. So it's linear, and it is also not. And this framework that I've presented over the past few months supports you with a mindful redesign. This is something that is going to empower you to actually have the awareness to know, let me actually take a pause and zoom out, because this is some shit I wish someone told me. Most of us get caught up in the micro moments, right? The day to day. Well, let me just make it through the end of the day. Tomorrow's a new day. And while, yes, the daily steps that you take time after time are going to lead to that long-term result, right? That's going to create your reality and create your life. At the same time, it's something where if you don't take a moment every now and again to step back and make sure that you are stepping every day in the right direction, then it's something that before you know it, when you do step back, when something does happen, then you might find that, oh snap, I have created a life that isn't the one that I necessarily would have wanted, kind of a thing. And so that's why we're here having this conversation. That's why we're talking about this redesign, so that you can take that step back from the micro moments and look at the macro. Most of us only do this about once a year, right? Like New Year's resolutions, we do it then. And even then, it's not something where we really get strategic about it. We like set some goals, hope for the best. And then studies have shown, Josh and I did an episode on this, that most people will have abandoned those New Year's resolutions by January 19th, which is crazy. So I can link that in the description if you're interested in hearing about that episode and some ways to not do that and something to do instead of setting New Year's resolutions. But whenever we are taking this macro approach, when we're taking a step back, it's important to do this strategically so that you can look at the things that you actually care about and measure them and see where they are and set times to reevaluate those that are not 365 days later, but that are 90 days later, 30 days later, something like that, so that you can see what worked, what didn't, and then you can adjust to go back to taking those micro moments, those steps on a daily basis to get you to where it is that you actually want to go, because we're looking at both, right? We're looking at the micro moments that are going to get us there. We're looking at the macro view of making sure that we are still going in the right direction. So if you want to think of it this as in terms of like looking at a map, we are, taking the steps from the day to day, but then every once in a while we're zooming out to make sure that we're still headed in the direction that we want to go, wherever that may be based on your goals. And so this, like I said, is a framework that enables you to be mindful about this before some stuff goes down. Now, that isn't to say that there won't ever be things that happen that are out of your control, right? And so I keep talking about like, prepare yourself, like make sure that you are set up for success. And that is all very true and important. And at the same time, I want to point out that there are some things that you will just not have control over. So things like the way that other people act, right? The things that they do, things like a global pandemic. We can't control these things. 2 examples, there's plenty more, but for the purposes of our conversation, it's something where when those things happen, we can be smart about how we take care of things before those things ever happen, so that if and when those things do happen, we have one less thing to worry about, right? Because we've already like done our due diligence like on the back end so that the other stuff is taken care of. And so now the pivot isn't so stark, right? So it's not, let's say, like a 90-degree, it's like a 45-degree kind of a situation. And so that's why we're having this conversation. And that's some shit that someone had told me. And I also want to point out that speaking of the pandemic, a lot of people really struggled with that time, right? And we had an episode about this, Abigail and I, grieving the loss of your identity. It is episode 40, because a lot of people really tied, things that they do on a day-to-day, their job titles, these kinds of things, to their identity and who they are. And so when that was gone overnight, it was really challenging for a lot of us. And, as such, a lot of people really reevaluated what it is that's important to them. And what a lot of people found is that, spending time with loved ones is really important. Taking care of their health, both mentally and physically, is really important. And working from home in, a comfortable environment, not having to go in the office all day, being able to, stay at home and, do your laundry, like while you're at work, like have a load of laundry in, like whatever the case may be, like still doing your job, but, having that freedom, if you will, to live your life. And a lot of us really shifted the ways in which we do that. Number one, because we had to, right? And also number two, because then once we had that contrast, once we saw what that was like, a lot of us wanted to. And currently, at the time of this episode's debut, some are saying that we are in a recession. According to the general definition, 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product, so GDP, is what would, describe or define a recession. And the US would have entered into a recession in the summer of 2022. However, there are others who are waiting for the National Bureau of Economic Research to make the final call. And as of now, from what I could find, they have yet to do so. And that information is from fortune.com as of October 6th, 2022. And so I'm not saying this to scare you or because I'm like, well, that was random. I'm saying that because we are talking about creating a life redesign, and we're talking about being real and looking at these unforeseeable events. And we're talking about now, hey, we are, according to some, already in a recession. And this is to, again, let you know and to remind you and invite you and encourage you to provide the awareness to say like, hey, before things, get bad, or, maybe they already are, but before another day goes by, it might be a time to start doing some of that reevaluating, right? It might be a time to start looking at paying down debt, to beefing up your emergency savings, to looking to see where you can save some money. To do those things by reviewing your monthly subscriptions. Maybe you don't necessarily need the subscription, or maybe you can like downgrade to a different tier. And, you can start to look at things in that regard so that you can, again, safeguard for come what may. And I bring all this up because, like I said, when we are talking about a life redesign, like I mentioned in the beginning, this can seem daunting AF. Like I said, like my whole life, like where do I even begin? Valid, super valid. You could totally, redesign the whole thing. And it might be something where when you get into looking at your life now, you realize, hey, I actually do want to do that. But it's important that you know where to start. So while, yes, let's take that macro view, let's zoom out, let's look at the things in your life that are working, the things that are not. It's also important to then go back into that micro view and do those small sustainable steps that are going to get you to that big macro goal that you decide that you want to redesign your life to look like. And it's important to, again, know that once you have that view, you are going to be able to step more steadfast and make better decisions and make more confident decisions and feel better about the decisions that you're making because you have your eye on both views, right? Like we're looking at both perspectives. We're looking at, again, that day to day, this is what I'm doing to get to that zoomed out, where I want to go. And so whenever you are thinking about this, it's something where, sure, you might decide you want to redesign the whole ass thing. Great. But you have to start somewhere. And so where is it that you want to start? Is it with your finances? Is it with your relationships? Is it your environment, meaning like your literal physical environment? Maybe some home updates. And I don't mean necessarily a renovation. I mean just cleaning up and rearranging some things, because that in and of itself is a powerful change. Because while we can mentally think, hey, I'm going to start thinking about these different things, I'm going to start acting this, new way, it's something totally different whenever we see physical changes within our environment, because that tells us, oh, things have already changed. So maybe that looks like shifting up, your office, or redesigning that, making, it a bit more homey in terms of bringing in some flowers or lighting or whatever the case may be for you. Maybe it just looks like rearranging, like I said, but doing something that physically shows and tells your brain and body, oh, this is actually different, right? So we got the mental part. Hey, I want to make a change. I want to redesign my life. So then let's actually create some changes to serve as evidence to say, well, that's already in progress. Okay. So some other things that you can start to consider whenever you are like, I want to redesign my life, your health. You can look at your mental health. We can redesign the physical health. Maybe it's both. Again, start with one. We can also, look at your career, your spirituality, whatever it is that you feel like whenever you take this zoomed out macro view, that you're like, these are all things that I want to change to redesign my life. Like these are all the main domains, right? And the one that I want to start with is this one, kind of a thing. And one way that you can do this, real quick, sidebar, bonus, is to take out a piece of paper, write down all of your domains on the left of whatever that domain is. And so like say, for example, the domains that we are using for the purposes of this demonstrative example: finances, relationship, physical environment, health, mental, physical, spirituality, and career. So to the left of that, you would write on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not important at all, 10 being of utmost importance, how important each one of those things are to you. And you don't have to rank them. Like, they can all be, well, I would say not all of them are probably going to be 10s, but we could have a couple 10s, we can have a couple of 7s, 5s, whatever. And rank them in order of importance on the left, right? And then I want you to go to the right of that domain, and I want you to put same thing, scale of 1 to 10, 1 being super unhappy, 10 being couldn't be any better. And I want you to write, or rank rather, how happy you are currently, right here, right now, today, with that domain. Because what this is going to enable you to do is take a macro view of the important domains in your life, right? The top domains. And from there, which ones are most important to you with that ranking on the left, and which ones might need to get some attention first on the right with that ranking. So that is your homework for this episode. Think about where in your life you can do some redesigning, or where it is that you want to do some redesigning. Remember that nothing has to be wrong in any of these domains, in any of these situations, but I want you to think about where you want to make things even better. Don't wait until something breaks down and you have to do it, right? Choice energy. What do you want to change, over chore energy? Oh God, I have to change this thing, right? Like I don't have any choice at this point. Like you're backed into a corner. So let's do it while you're still able to like walk around in the room. And now is the time to do that, so that you can hopefully prevent that breakdown from happening, or if it is inevitable, if it is something that is going to just happen, then hopefully this will prepare you that much more for if and when it does. So that is all I have for you today. Pretty quick one. If you got anything anything out of this episode, please do share it with a friend and or in your stories over on Instagram, and make sure to tag me at Hey Johnna Renée. Let me know what stood out most. Let me know what was most helpful for you. And on Wednesday, I will be following up on your homework via the polls and asking where it is that you would want to start your life redesign, so that I can speak to that on Friday at the live. And so I'll also be providing the space for you to ask any and all questions that you may have about a life redesign in the polls as well. So definitely make sure to head over Hey Johnna Renée on Instagram so that you can take advantage of that. Check out the description for some suggested supporting episodes. I'm going to make sure to include the one that I mentioned about grieving the loss of your identity. And also I'll link the one about Josh and me where we spoke about how most people abandon their New Year's resolutions by January 19th, which is crazy. And I'm also going to include a conversation that Margot Harris and I had. Should I wish someone told me 57, creating a life on your own terms. We talk about 3 things specifically that Margot wishes someone had told her when it comes to doing that. So there'll also be a link to some supporting resources down there. So definitely make sure to scroll on, tap back and scroll on whenever you are finished listening to this. I hope that you have an amazing start to your week, and I will see you over on Instagram on Wednesday. Bye.